Welcome everyone to my top 10 movies of 2022. I'm excited for this because this is the first year in a few years that I've been able to do this. I literally just could not make a top 10 for 2020. I saw a reasonable amount of movies that came out, but most movies got delayed. 2021, very similar story. More came out than 2020 itself, but it's still, I didn't really have enough that I could say I liked. Like, obviously, I saw more than 10 movies. I could rank technically the 10 best movies I saw, but I didn't really like probably half of them. I could have maybe have squeezed the top 5. So, this is the first year since 2019 where I have an actual top 10. And obviously, I've not seen everything. There's still more to see that I want to get around to. But I figured it's January 2023. Before time goes on too much, I should get into it. The only other point I'll make before I start this is that there is going to be a top 10 horror movies that I did with Tim that'll be coming out in early March, but that is not my top 10 horror, that is our combined top 10 horror. So even if you think this spoils a little bit of that list when the horror movies pop up, it doesn't necessarily mean it will, because that's a joint list between me and Tim that we debated on. So look out for that in a little bit. But here I am. Top 10 movies of 2022. I thought it was a great year for movies. There was a nice variety of movies that I really enjoyed. And hopefully, we'll have some fun going through this, and maybe you'll get some recommendations. At the very least, we can celebrate some good movies. So let's get into it. Number 10 is The Menu. This is a satirical comedy with a little bit of horror, a little bit of thriller, all these things. It's about a fancy dining experience where a bunch of rich people get taken off on a boat to a restaurant that's on a tiny island. And Ralph Fiennes plays this like top celebrity chef that has a really specific menu plan for them, but there's something nefarious going on. The hitch to the whole thing is that Anna Taylor-Joy plays the one character who's not actually supposed to be there. She's a replacement for someone else, and that kind of messes up the plans that the chef had. So I don't want to spoil much of this. I think you should go in as cold as you can. I will say I assumed a lot of things from the trailer that weren't true. It was actually very different to what I thought it was going to be. The important things here is that it was very, 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 very funny. I was laughing a lot through this. It may be the funniest movie I saw from 2022. And the performances of all the lead cast are very good. It's very biting. It's very satirical. There's a lot of stuff. Given that it's all rich characters that are in this restaurant, there's a lot of, class structure comedy and stuff like that. A lot of commentary about the rich and the 1% and all that kind of stuff. But it's very funny, it's very witty, and the script is pretty smart at times. I think it doesn't overly convolute itself, but it's pretty smart in that it kind of pokes fun at very specific things. Just a really good time overall, but it has something to say, which is nice. And it's kind of a feel-good movie, ultimately, I would say, which is bizarre given the premise. When you realize what's going on, it feels like it's... if I was to describe and spoil some of the stuff that happens, it would sound very dark. And it is in concept, but it's always got this kind of wit to it. So it never feels like you're in a punishing movie as a viewer. And I would say that ultimately it's kind of oddly uplifting by the end. Unless maybe if you're in the 1%, maybe you wouldn't see it that way. But I think for everyone else, you'll find some catharsis in The Menu. So I highly recommend it. Number 9 is The Banshees of the Inisherin, if I'm saying that correctly. It is a film set in Ireland, starring Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson. I want to say Domhnall Gleeson, but that's his son, Brendan Gleeson. And it's actually a really simple story set in the 1920s, I think, if I remember correctly, on a small island off the coast of Ireland. And it's... which made me think of Father Ted, I have to admit. Because when I think of an island off, as part of Ireland, but a small island off the mainland, I think of Father Ted and Craggy Island. But it's about two Irishmen who break up, effectively. They're friends, and one day Brendan Gleeson at the start of the movie just says, I don't want to be friends anymore. And the movie is just the fallout of that. There's also the backdrop of the Irish Civil War going on the mainland that's kind of mentioned here or there. And I don't really know much about that. From a historical context, I don't really know much about, even though there was an Irish Civil War in the 1920s. So that was news to me. But this is from McDonough, who did Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and of course with the same two cast members did In Bruges, as well as Seven Psychopaths. And I enjoyed Seven Psychopaths. In Bruges, I thought was good, but it was probably overhyped for me. Like, people were telling me it was like the greatest thing ever. So when I finally watched it, I was a little bit underwhelmed. And then Three Billboards, I know is very divisive. Some people really like it. It got a lot of awards buzz. Some people don't like it. I thought it was well directed. I don't know if the story and the characters always click for me, though. So I think this is probably my favorite of his movies, and I think it's, again, very funny. Close to being as funny as The Menu in places, actually. Like, every time Colin Farrell reacts to something, it kind of cracked me up a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of very Irish humor in here. And again, having watched Father Ted growing up, I was familiar with many of the Irishisms that are in this. But I learned a few new ones, and the cast is always very good. But this was getting a lot of buzz as well. This was one that I watched. I sought this out because it was getting a lot of praise, and it kind of lived up to everything. I love how simple it was. I love the very simple kind of setup, and just the very few locations. You know, it's a couple of houses in the pub, and just a few other things around this island that we kind of visit. And there's characters that you like, there's characters that you very much dislike. There's a good supporting cast as well. You've got there's a guy whose name I don't know, but I've seen him in a few things. He was in Eternals. Kerry Condon from Better Call Saul is in here with her thick Irish accent, so that was kind of a trip. But it's just it's a really good character drama that happens to also be constantly very funny. And much like The Menu, this is also about something, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's that subtle either. Like, I think by the end of the movie, you can kind of like get the broad strokes of what the movie's saying and what it's doing. But it feels like it's about a subject that is not often explored specifically by the people that it's about. Right? If it's about men and about how they don't cope with their feelings and talk about them and understand them, then that's what the movie is, and it's about that subject. So it's you know, and that's brought up throughout the movie, and I don't think that's spoiling anything by any means. But like I say, it's about a friendship breakup. That's what the movie is. So I would highly recommend The Banshees of Inisherin. Number 8 is X. So delving into some horror, and it was a very good year for horror movies. And X was Ty West's film set in the 70s. It's a throwback to like Texas Chainsaw style movies. And it's about a group of characters who are making a porn movie, and they do it at this sort of like farmhouse. And sure enough, eventually people start being killed, and there's some big reveals about what's going on. It's very stylish. It feels very authentic to the time period that it's set in. You know, it was really going for that 70s aesthetic, and it's really genuine. And likewise, you know, the Pearl prequel that came out later in the year felt like it was going for a very specific style set in in like 1918. You know, it was going for that Technicolor kind of look. They both have very specific styles, but X has that kind of gritty, grimy. It's basically what Rob Zombie's been trying to do with every movie he's made, but kind of like failed to make any of them that compelling. And I realize that will ruffle some feathers, but I think he did a better job because I actually liked watching this. You know, and it's not without some moments of levity, but it's got a great cast. You got Mia Goth playing multiple roles, Jenny Ortega, who kind of became a bit of a screen queen this year, between this, Scream 5, and to an extent Wednesday, and she was probably in a couple of movies as well, but like certainly even just those three things felt like, oh, all of a sudden she's kind of a star. In the same way that Anya Taylor-Joy kind of suddenly became a star with The Witch and a couple other things soon after. So but I think what sticks out to me about this is that I found all of the main characters to be fairly likable. Barring maybe one that's supposed to be a little less likable, but you kind of understand the character's faults, but I think most of them are likable, and it takes, it's a good hour of the movie before anyone starts dying, I think, and I think that actually helps it. It makes you care a little bit more about them. So, well, it's kind of a slasher movie. It's a slasher movie with a little bit more intelligence in the screenwriting to actually make you give a shit about the characters. So, they're at the very least always kind of fun. Like, they've got some witty dialogue going back and forth, and not like a self-referential kind of dialogue, because hell knows we're all pretty sick of that. in recent years. I am anyway. Just witty in the sense that they're all, they're knowledgeable characters. They're talking about porn, sex, love, the 70s, like all these things that are sort of key to the themes of the film and expression, and that's all thick throughout. So it's kind of this thing where I think that this term elevated horror has become this term to mean stuff like The Witch that I just mentioned, or like A Midsummer or something. And I think X is this perfect middle ground where it's quite smart in what it's doing, and it is talking about stuff, it's talking about specific themes, so it's smarter than a typical slasher movie, but it's also not trying to be ultra highbrow either. It's trying to be a really well made. In many ways, it feels like if, in the same way that Tarantino kind of tries to evoke eras of filmmaking, but they all feel distinctly Tarantino, this feels like it's evoking a certain era of filmmaking, but feels kind of like what Ty West would do. So, X, I really liked it. It was a good time. Number 7 is Prey. Holy shit, I actually have a good Predator movie in my lifetime. Okay, Predator 2 was in my lifetime, but I was like 1 or 2 years old, so I'm not counting that, right? I was a baby. But ever since I knew I loved Predator, and I do love Predator 2 as well, every single Predator featured film that came out after has been mediocre to garbage. Some people stick up for Predators. Like, I have tried to love that movie. I have tried repeatedly. But when I saw it in theaters in 2010, when I saw it again at home, when I saw it for review on the Atomic Cinema Experiment last year, every single time, I come out thinking it's the most 5 out of 10 movie that ever 5 out of 10. It is so bland and just repeating things from Predator with none of the character or charm or skill or talent. And that might sound harsh, but I really feel that way when I watch it. I feel like a big bland fart. Prey, and we're not going to talk about the Predator. I'm bringing that one up because people defend it. Prey is back to basics, keeping things simple, but it's set in a different time period. It's set during Native American times, with the tribes and all that stuff, and it's a Predator lands in this time period, and a young woman, played by Amber Midthunder, if I remember her name correctly, who was great in the movie, and she was great in her role on Legion, which is a show that went downhill, but season 1 was very good. She's great in this, and it's the whole idea of like, okay, Predator 1, the idea was that you've got this team of ultimate badasses, of Arnold, of Jesse Ventura, of all these big muscly men, and they're taken out like they're teenagers in a slasher movie because this thing from outer space is that great and dangerous and good at what he does. What if you put that thing up against a young woman in a time that is technologically far less advanced, right? In a time where there's no like machine guns, there's no firepower. Like, I mean, there's cannons, sure, in parts of the world, but the Native Americans don't have the cannons. They don't have, like, there's any firepower that is there in terms of like guns is very limited and very old fashioned. And the Predator in the movie's a little bit less technically advanced, but still much more than the humans because they're still traveling on spaceships and that stuff like that. But what's so great about it is that it's the idea that this is a rookie Predator versus this young woman who's determined to prove herself because she's, it's just assumed that she will do what all the other women in the tribe do. She will pick flowers, she'll cook, she'll sew, so on. And she doesn't want that. She wants to be a hunter. She wants to prove that she can be a hunter. So she seeks out this mysterious thing that's in the woods and tries to prove that she can take it down. So again, it's got a little bit more to it. It's got a little bit of the girl power kind of like trying to rise up and prove that she's worthy kind of story. So that's very, like that gives it a little bit more meat to the story beyond just like fighting a predator. But then you've got the cool Predator scenes with the tech and all that stuff. It's well directed. It's the director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, Dan Trachtenberg, who I was looking forward to when he was going to make a movie because it felt like that was a while ago. That was like 2016 or something like that. So it was a good little while between movies. The concept was good. As soon as they showed the title and the poster, it was like, okay, there's potential here. And I think the movie lives up to it because it's not as good as Predator, like the first movie by any means, but it's got good music, it's got good cinematography, it's got a compelling main character who you want to root for. She's even got a dog who helps her, and that's great stuff. So yeah, it's easy to get into, and it's nice that Predator as a franchise has like a a strong female lead now. Because like Alien has that. Alien started with that with Ripley. But Predator, by its nature, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Predator 1 should be any different, because again, the idea is you get the ultimate sort of team of Rambos, and you have them be torn apart by this ultimate killing machine to prove how dangerous it is. But we've done that now, and it's nice to like explore other ideas. And most people are thrown out there like, oh, let's do Predator in like feudal Japan, let's do Predator in the on a space station, let's do Predator in like the Arctic or something. Like, all of these are valid, right? They could all end up sucking. The reason why this works is not just the premise. The premise is good, but the reason why it works is because it's got talent behind the camera, and it's a really easy to watch movie. I watched it twice for review when it came out, and it was very easy to watch that second time. Sometimes I worry about that, and I think it was a really pleasant time even the second time through, in very close proximity. It was like a couple of days later, and there's some really nice touches. Like we talked a lot about them in the review, but when I thought about it even more, there was a really great point about the ending, which I'm not going to bring up because we're not doing spoilers here. But there's a really great point about comparing it to the first movie and a very similar kind of moment that happens and how it plays out differently, which I thought, oh, that's actually quite genius. So there's some smart little touches in there, and it doesn't do too many prequel references that just feel prequel reference. There's only a couple, and they feel a bit more earned, and they feel like they're saying something about what's going on. Like they actually reveal information by comparing it to Predator. And in a roundabout way, obviously, no one in the movie says, "Hey, just like in this future movie that happens." Not like that, obviously, but really great. Good, fun, fresh spin on the Predator franchise, and it was nice to have a good one. Will there be more good ones? Who knows? But we can hope that maybe Alien as well can get turn the ship around, as it were, because that's been a rough rough franchise for a while. But hey, there's going to be a Hulu Alien movie as well, so maybe it'll be good. Here's hoping. Number 6 is Everything Everywhere All at Once, another science fiction movie. This is a movie starring Michelle Yeoh, and she starts traveling through the multiverse. Wait, God, that's not even. I mean, it is right, but it's not. Like that implies she's just jumping through portals. It's actually a lot more intricate than that. It's a very inventive movie, and the way it presents how someone like connects to other versions of themselves or travels through the multiverse is already very inventive and shows different things. But at its core, it's a story about her family and her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her teenage daughter, and the way it sort of weaves that into all the different Earths and all the different things that are happening. Jamie Lee Curtis has got a pretty small but very memorable role in the movie. It's very funny at times. The action is really well shot, and again, it's very wacky and inventive because it's doing these different things. But there's some really good emotional beats later in the film, and Ke Huy Quan, I want to say, if I'm misremembering that name, I'm doing it from memory, but the actor who was Data in the Goonies, he came back to acting after like 30 years away from it, and he's great as the husband. He's fantastic. He's got good fight scenes. He's very funny. You can actually tell it's him because his voice is very distinct. Even though he was a kid the last time I saw him in something, his voice is so distinct that it actually, like, I can still hear him. Very, very good, and it's very playful in how it handles all of its concepts. And like even just the idea, like the stories about the family, the stories about fixing a family that's somewhat broken, and it portrays like different versions of the different family members across the multiverse in a number of ways that make it very fresh and exciting constantly as you're going through the movie. So yeah, I'd heard it was good. Like it was a couple of months old by the time I saw it, but it actually very much lived up, if not exceeded the hype that I'd heard about it. So that's Everything Everywhere All at Once. Number 5 is Crimes of the Future. So also science fiction, but going a little bit darker here. This is the new David Cronenberg film from 2022. And David Cronenberg is a really great director, but I do have my ups and downs with him. There's some Cronenberg movies I really like. There's some that I'm in the middle on, and then there's some that I don't like. I really like this movie. It's a really weird version of the future where some people are eating plastic. Also, some people are growing extra organs that they don't need. Viggo Mortensen's in there. Leah Sado, I think, is the actress's name, the female lead. Also, you have what's her face from Twilight, Kristen Stewart, and she's actually very good in the movie. Like all of them are very good in the movie, but it's very low budget. But like, it doesn't feel burdened by that. It still feels like the world still feels alive, and it has like a tone and an atmosphere, which is the first thing that I feel is absent when like a movie's struggling with its budget. And that probably largely comes from a director who is very experienced and probably has a lot of good people around him, of course, in their different roles, but specifically a director who's very experienced but is not lost it. There's so many directors who seem to get worse in their later years. Like they have like a weird cut off in their filmography. Cronenberg, I feel like, isn't like that at all. Cronenberg, I feel like, is bouncing around like stuff. I loved A History with Violence from 2005, but then Eastern Promises I wasn't that into. And like I feel like he's bouncing around all over the place, no matter what part of his career's in. I quite liked, I think Shivers I really liked, but then there's maybe like a movie that came out not long after that I didn't like that much. I'd have to go back and check, but there's definitely, films throughout his career that are like that. This has just had such a strong, like, right from the opening shot, there's this kind of, like, sad melancholy to the world that is persistent throughout, and it's kind of the story of there's like a cause in the world. Obviously it's all political commentary, it's all social commentary about the real world, as any good science fiction is, but there's like a cause in the world that it's about the main character like not really having a stance, but by the end of the movie he will have a stance. It's about people sort of like realizing where they stand in a new political climate that's very different to the one that existed before. And honestly, as far as like conversations go, if you about like the reviews we did over 2022, probably one of my favorite like films to like dig into and talk about and try and like analyze, and because some stuff isn't immediately obvious. Like there's some obvious like social commentary, but there's also some stuff that's not as obvious, and it was fun talking about that. It's also a very I won't say biographical film because it's not about Cronenberg's past, but there's a lot of himself in the movie. The main character considers himself an artist, and there's a lot of talk in the movie about your next piece of art and where you get your inspiration from. And Cronenberg, one of his original films back from the start of his career was also called Crimes of the Future, which this movie's not a remake of, but I think the choice to name it that, and I brought this up in the review, but I think the choice to name it that is an intentional kind of look back at how he feels about his own art and creating new art. And the character in the movie thinks, he may not have it anymore, but then he has, there's a bit of there's always like a new bit of inspiration, which, given that I'm saying I think Cronenberg has always kind of bounced back, even when I don't like a movie, it's not like he just has like a cut off, like, like a Brian De Palma or a John Carpenter, where they're very, very good for a long time, and then they just kind of plummet, and then they make nothing but crap for the latter part of their career. And it's a shame to see that when it happens, but I think Cronenberg, which is funny because I don't like Cronenberg at his prime as much as I do those two directors. But I think Cronenberg has done a better job of like still making good movies like throughout his career. So I really like Crimes of the Future. Really sort of melancholic, almost oppressive tone, which I think made it stick out amongst just the sci-fi movies of the year. I very much recommend it. It's a little art house. It's not super art house, but it's a little art house. So I would heed that warning, but I really liked it. All right, number 4 is Nope. So I saw this much later than everyone else. I only saw this in January for a couple of different reasons, but this is Jordan Peele's new film, and I think that I actually like this the most of his films. Obviously, Get Out's great. Us, I think, is really great for the most part, but there's a couple of story things and conceptual things that don't quite work as well for me. I think Nope is perfect as what it is, which is kind of like a... Well, I don't want to spoil it, because it's definitely a movie that killed what it really was close to its chest. Even the trailers, like, you go into it thinking it's going to be a UFO movie, and it is, but there's more to it than that, and it's also got social commentary, and again, there's a trend here with a lot of the good sci-fi and horror all have good social commentary. But I wouldn't say it's ultra elevated either. It doesn't feel like an art house movie. It's still like a really fun adventure, part horror, part sci-fi. There's actually a very simple subgenre that I can put it into, but I feel like it's spoiling a reveal in the movie, so I don't want to do that. But I will say that, I would compare it to a very specific subgenre and even a very specific movie from the past, like a big movie from cinema history that I would compare it to. That I'm not going to because of spoilers, but I could. If you look at the Screams After Midnight review and go to the spoiler section, you'll hear what I'm saying there. But very good. I like the cast. It's again, honestly, what's so different? I talked about how Crimes of the Future there has like a very oppressive, melancholic tone, and I think this, in contrast, has a very fun spirit to it. Like, even though it does have some really dark, tense scenes, and it does have some, it has some like big topics that it's discussing that are serious. It never stops not being kind of fun and just its like, it's on the surface like premise and plot. Like, it's on the surface, it's like a group of characters like seeing this thing in the sky, try to figure out what it is, and then one thing I love in movies is when you have something like this is that there's like clear rules that are established. How does this thing work? Okay, how can we use those rules to form a plan to possibly win against it? There's weaknesses and strengths and that kind of thing. Things to exploit that make sense to me because the movie sets them up well and then has the characters use them. And I really like that. I like that a lot. It's one of my favorite things in any kind of like horror sci-fi movie where there's enemy or enemies that like or either science fiction or supernatural or whatever. And I think this has that in spades, and there's some great big it's definitely Jordan Peele's best looking movie. I think there's some absolutely stunning shots, especially in the back half of the movie, that I think really stuck with me and really kind of felt like a big experience. Like, I really regretted not seeing it in the cinema because there's some really big, spectacular, visual, like blockbuster style moments, to put it in a way. Again, I'm trying to like avoid like talking about anything spoilery. So I really, really dug this and had a lot of fun with it. So I would definitely recommend Nope. Like, I was expecting to like Nope, but I was kind of like expecting to like it a little bit lower down the ladder, I suppose, compared to where I've put it. But so it's weird to say I was pleasantly surprised, but I was pleasantly even more enthusiastic about it than I thought I was going to be. I ended up coming out of it going, oh, I think I like this more than even Get Out. I almost said Get Us there. that's how you could. That's the company. That's the crossover movies. Get Us. But no, I really, really liked it. Great stuff. Number 3 is Avatar: Way of the Water, and Avatar: The Way of Water. Everyone makes that mistake with the title. It's very easy to put the of in the slightly in the wrong place, but it's not considered cool to like Avatar, right? Avatar 1 gets a lot of shit in the internet, and has done since 2009. Some valid criticisms. I'm not saying there's none, because it's not a perfect movie by any means. But I very much like the experience of Avatar. I saw Avatar 1 multiple times. I think it's a very well directed movie, obviously with the great visuals. I'm a big fan of James Cameron movies. My favorite movie of all time is Aliens. So naturally, I went in with excitement to the sequel and thought, well, the first film's got a very sort of traditional story, arguably true traditional. I expect the second one to be an improvement, not because I didn't like the first one, but just because it feels natural that it should do. And I did like Avatar: The Way of Water more than the first one. I like the characters. I like the family dynamic. I love that it's practically the kids' movie. Like Jake and Neytiri are there, but it really feels like we follow the kids. One in particular becomes kind of the main character, and it really feels like we could transition like the parents out of the franchise at some point, given that it's now made a bunch of money and Avatars 3, 4, and 5 are all certain. So. And I like that it does follow on. The time jump is there from like very similar to the real time jump, and the age that the kids are and stuff, which is kind of natural. But it feels like the visuals are even next level. But I almost don't even want to talk about that, even though they are like next level, and the effects are like you can see every penny they spent on the screen. Whereas I think a lot of recent big movies, I don't see the money on the screen. It feels like the money goes to the cast, and then like the effects are rushed, and it feels, like they don't care about hitting like new like milestones with visual effects anymore because they don't think the audience cares. But as time goes on, like, I think I do care. I think the one that I'll compare it to more than anything, not that it's the worst example, but I think it's the example that's worth comparing it to, is Avengers Endgame, where that's the movie that beat Avatar, won for a while box office wise, although Avatar crossed it again when it got re-released. And that's it's this big movie, it's this culmination of the MCU and all these things. And obviously I have fun with that movie. It's got a lot of good things in it, and a lot of good things in that final big like set piece fight, this big war that happens at the end of the movie. But one of those things that I don't think is that special is how it looks. Like visually, I don't think it looks that good. I don't think the choreography of the fight's even that impressive. It's all just it's a lot of individual little moments that are sort of fan pleasing moments but it doesn't really matter like where they're happening on the battlefield or anything like that. It's just kind of the big, it's a big blank battlefield with just debris. What I'm saying is that it's not just how it looks, but it's also how the action's choreographed and directed. And James Cameron knows how to direct action. And when the action happens in this, it is stunning. It is the third act is just this ridiculously expensive thing with aliens. We're in the water. There's ships. There's mechs, suits. There's all this stuff going on, and it makes you care. I think one of the things I also love about it, again in the context of like current like big budget movies in Hollywood, is how earnest it is. Like some people complain that the story's still fairly simple. It's a fairly simple sort of revenge story, but honestly, like it takes its story seriously. Not to say there's no levity, but it takes its story seriously, and it wears its heart on its sleeve. It's a movie that wants you to feel emotion for the characters, and it'll do emotional stuff with the kids, and it wants you to care about them. But it doesn't, make self-referential quips about it. It doesn't have to stop and go, "Hey, look at how crazy we're being as a movie." It doesn't do that. And that's something that a lot of other big movies feel like they have to have an X amount of quippy jokes. Especially the Marvel movies, but it's not just them that are guilty of it. It's just easy to use them as the example because they're the main big thing in Hollywood. But it was actually refreshing to not have quippiness in the movie. It was refreshing just for the story to want to take itself seriously, not in like it's a really dark tone sort of serious story. Just that it's taking its story that it's telling seriously. And it'll have moments where it wants you to feel happy, where it wants you to feel sad, scared, excited, and it just wants you to feel all those things without being wink wink, look at us being a movie. And I really appreciate that. But no, I did care about the characters. I cared about the family. I cared about the kids especially. I was so invested in the story of the characters in the last act. And everything is just directed in a way, especially the action, that is so above par of other big, budget Hollywood movies by and large. I think if I'm going back to another well-directed, like, sort of action movie, like, I'm thinking Mad Max Fury Road, as far as, like, the actual action set pieces goes, where I'm as enjoying the set pieces in and of themselves, and obviously the story and around it enhances it, and the action scenes enhance the story itself as it should. But I don't feel like I felt that with other big budget stuff in a while. And outside of Marvel, what have I been seeing big budget wise in the last few years? Like that last Jurassic World movie. I mean, I've not seen the last couple of Fast and the Furious movies, but I saw like 6, 7, and 8, and nothing in those was touching like what I like about Fury Road or Avatar 2. Like there's an art form to making big budget spectacle action sequences that I think is people, if it has half decent effects, they just go along with it, and there's some jokes to be had. And I think this has a lot of things that I have missed from cinema. Not that there was always bad big budget movies, don't get me wrong. They were always mixed in with the good stuff. Arguably there was never more than a couple of good ones a year, really. Really good ones, like genuinely good films. But this was so just exciting to have an earnest movie that is very well directed and has cutting edge visuals that actually feel cutting edge, and I like they're a step above the original Avatar. It's another leap ahead from that, and just how like the fidelity and how detailed everything is and how realistic things look. But given that movies in the last decade, for the most part, haven't lived up to what Avatar did, it feels like an even bigger leap, because it's like an even, like the example when I was talking about it in the review, and Tara said, "What about the Apes trilogy?" Like, yeah, that's like one of the exceptions is that the CGI in the Planet of the Apes trilogy, particularly Dawn and War, it was exceptional, right? And as far as like mocap and like a human playing a different creature on screen goes, and like the emotion in the eyes and all that stuff, next level stuff, right? Really, really was. But that is like the one exception, I think, out of like the last decade or so of Hollywood as far as impressing me like consistently. There's movies that have some stuff, don't get me wrong, like, I think if I was to give another example, it'd maybe be Interstellar, because like the stuff in space and that and the other planets look fantastic, but that doesn't have, except for maybe the robots, I guess, like it doesn't have like characters that are made out of CG. It doesn't have that kind of thing, which is why I don't necessarily think it is a complete comparison, but it is worth mentioning. Stunning looking film, right? And again, it feels like it comes from a director who's passionate about what he's making and wants to make it, like for whatever you want to say. And I guess the thing I'm saying I love about Avatar 2 is that it's a film that like, this is James Cameron's film. This is a director's film. He wanted to make this. He cares about what he's making, and it's, it feels like his film, for better and for worse, for warts and all. It feels like a passion project from the person who made it. And, I don't feel that from Jurassic World 3. I don't feel that from, whatever Marvel movies came out in the last year. Like, I don't feel it from them. And I'm picking on those because I remember those ones. I don't, but there's definitely other examples. So, I will take a flawed, passionate film over a competent film that doesn't feel like it has any heart and soul in it any day of the week. And you can feel that in a movie. You can. I think I can definitely feel it in a movie. And maybe sometimes a director will debate me that they did have heart and passion in it and they cared about their movie, but I guess you have to match it with the talent that to actually make it come across. But so yeah, I've talked a lot about this one because I know this is the one that's probably going to get the most heat in the well, maybe not the most heat, but more on that later. But this one's going to get a lot of heat. People love to shit on Avatar, so I'm sticking up for this one in particular. But that's my number 3. Number 2, in a year where I am so sick of superhero movies, pretty much from every spectrum, number 2 is The Batman. Because it's really goddamn good. This was a special experience to go in to see this, and it's a very different tone of Batman than we got with even the Nolan trilogy. And I still love the Nolan, like my favorite Batman movies are still the Nolan trilogy. But this felt like, in the same way that and I read the comics. I'm used to going from like one writer and artist like run on a character to the next one, and I feel like this is what this was. This was one director's finished his stuff. Let's ignore the Snyderverse shit. This is another like talented filmmaker coming in and doing his version of Batman. And I don't necessarily want it to retread similar ground. Obviously, it's an early career Batman story. It's like his second year or whatever being Batman, and some of those early elements are still there, where some of the big villains aren't introduced yet, and he's not quite eradicated the corruption in the city yet, and all that kind of thing. But visually has a very specific style. It looks great. The action scenes, which are not plentiful, it holds back on the action. It's not trying to be a constant action movie. The action scenes feel kind of special when they show up because of that. It is definitely trying to be more of a detective story. And it's a 3-hour long detective story with different sort of like chapters in it. In many ways, I said this when I reviewed it with David, that it really does feel like a comic book arc brought to life, and that comic books are normally released as single issues, and usually 6 or 7 issues make up a story, sometimes more, sometimes less, but that's kind of your average. you can almost feel in this movie where each issue ends. This is where the cliffhanger is for issue 5. It kind of feels like that when you're watching, and it's not based on a comic book story specifically. Obviously, there's a lot taken from comic books because it's a Batman movie, but it's not based on an actual comic arc. But I love the focus on Bruce/Batman having an arc and learning something by the end of the movie. I like the steampunk vibes of it. Colin Farrell, here he is again, was really good as the Penguin. I liked that there was kind of some tension to Alfred and Bruce's story that is explored a little bit in the movie. And, ultimately, I loved what it was saying about the character, but also just, it's the whole thing, like, is talking about the idea of using masks, and it kind of compares being a superhero to using, like, avatars and masks online. The idea that if you're on Twitter or you're on a message board or Reddit, you get to say things behind the mask because they don't know who you really are. And that's really smart. It's really smart to take the idea of, like, the secret identity of a superhero and use it to say something about that. And the idea of, like, the impact you can have on everyone else by the sort of things that you say when you're wearing your mask. Exploring that stuff, I think, was really smart. I really liked it a lot. I thought the Catwoman, Zoe Kravitz, that's her name, right? That's her name. I'm doubting myself, but I think that's her name. I thought she was really good. She had that kind of cheekiness to her, that sly Selena Kyle kind of vibe, which I really appreciate. There's some really great stuff where it plays with fights in the dark, which I really liked. And it has that, like, comic book style narration at the start, and it really kind of, it was like, hey, this is a Batman movie, but we're going to try to achieve certain things from Batman comics that even some of the best Batman movies have not tried to do, which I really appreciate. Is even though obviously there's some overlap in some of the core messaging, because ultimately it still understands who Batman is, so there's some things that are going to overlap with, say, Nolan's movies or the animated series or whatever. And I'm bringing up the ones that I like when I bring up examples. It's it's trying to do certain elements of Batman that the Nolan movies never tried to nail, and it's doing a great job, and that's what makes it feel different. So that even as a Batman fan who's seen, like, a really good Batman trilogy that I love and adore, I got something different out of this. It feels like it's tapping into different parts of the character, that it's doing something different with it. There is, like, one sort of sequel tease scene that I kind of hated, so hopefully that doesn't mean I'm going to hate the sequel. I really hope not, because I really loved the rest of the movie. But otherwise fantastic, and it meant a lot to me as a Batman fan. It felt like, Batman's this very lucky character in that because he's so popular, we get these different takes from some of the different creatives behind it, and gets all the best talent thrown at it. And it's why that even though we're getting this rebooted DC movie universe with James Gunn at the helm, Matt Reeves' Batman still gets to just exist. That's still getting its sequel, and it's going to be disconnected from the rest of the new movies because it did well, people loved it, and it's going to get its sequel, which is cool. But I like that it wasn't connected to other movies. I think the failed attempts of doing that, and the fact that I'm even sick of the MCU in general, means that it was just nice for it. No, this is just a through and through a Batman world, and I guess it feels so focused because of that, and it feels like the movie's saying something by the end. And I felt that I was talking about passion project vibes. It felt like Matt Reeves was making this with passion, and I think when that goes away is when you start to feel like you've got something a bit hollow. And I don't think there's anything hollow about this at all. It is a blockbuster. It is a funded blockbuster by a big studio to make a lot of money, but it can still have that passion at the core if they let the filmmaker go and make the film they want to make. And I felt that when I watched this. There was very little in this that felt like studio interference, maybe a couple of small things at best, but it felt like this was the movie that Matt Reeves wanted to make. So, thumbs up! The Batman was very, very good. And my number one movie of 2022... Terrifier 2. I love Terrifier 2. Terrifier 2 was like this weird... Again, talking about passion projects, this is a movie that's made for... Like, the budget for this was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was under $1 million. And it looks so good for what it is. It looks like a grimy, low-budget movie that doesn't look like it was shot on, cheap video. It looks like a film evoking a slasher movie of the 80s, but it's this sequel to a movie that people have been discovering since it came out in 2016. Terrifier 1 came out in. With a character, Art the Clown, the killer, who was introduced before that. He was in some short films, then he was in like an anthology movie by the director called All Hallows Eve, and then Terrifier was like, okay, this is his like movie franchise. And Terrifier 2 is like a 2-hour, 20-minute slasher movie that expands upon the first movie's mythology, and the mythology is actually shockingly interesting and kind of vague. It's kind of like, you know, you really have to think about it and like, you know, think about all the other appearances that Art the Clown's had to kind of piece some of it together. But I really enjoy talking about it. I love how over the top the violence and the gore is. Art the Clown is a killer who loves what he does and he takes pleasure in it. He's laughing, he's smiling. He doesn't talk, of course, that's part of his characteristics. But the violence is so ridiculous and over the top, and at times so violent that it becomes funny. And it's shocking how much fun this movie is. But it also gives you, in this movie specifically, which is new to the franchise, is a heroine, a hero, a final girl, if you will, someone to root for who also kind of has some mythology built in as the movie goes on, that you want to root for. It's got a great soundtrack, and I was in love with this. I actually got to see this in theaters, kind of, and I say kind of because I was jet lagged and I fell asleep halfway through, which I hated myself for afterwards because I was loving what I was watching up until that point. And I really liked Terrifier 1. Like, I thought Terrifier 1 was a great find. Like, I thought it was a great little gem of a slasher. It was a really mean slasher movie that had a nice sort of like dark sense of humor to it. And I think Terrifier 2 just upped everything. And it upped things in a surprising way because, like, I was expecting, the kills to be more over the top. I was expecting Art the Clown to be entertaining to watch again. I was not expecting this layer of mythology and, like, a lead character to root for that I was really going to get into, and just love all these things in a way. Terrifier 2 feels like a movie that was made just for me in a weird way. And I want to, like, emphasize how important that is in terms of, like, being like my favorite thing. Nothing is more boring or bland to me than something that is made to please everyone. And I can respect things that aren't quite for me, but clearly are very passionate and feel like they're exactly what they're supposed to be for their audience or whatever, right? And part of the reason why I'm bored of a lot of big budget movies these days is because they feel very much like they're all part of a franchise, and they're all, and this is a sequel. This is technically part of a franchise. In fact, so are the last two movies I mentioned. They're technically franchise movies. But compared to a lot of other franchise movies, I love when something feels like it's unapologetically what it is. And, you know, Damien Leone, I think you say his name, the director of this movie and the writer, he clearly cares about this. He worked hard over years to make this movie with his, you know, dedicated cast and crew. And it was this little movie that kept getting extended its theater run, and it made, like, you know, a very respectable amount of money for a movie that cost so little and wasn't supposed to play for longer than one weekend before it went to streaming. And it was this little movie that could. And I think part of the reason why it resonates with a lot of people, not everyone's going to connect with it, right? But I think that's why it works. I think a movie that's not going to connect with everyone is going to connect more to the people it connects to, because it's unapologetically what it is. When you have something that's more broad to appeal to everyone, it's inherently less interesting and lacks as much of a personality. It lacks that spark that makes it special. And part of being special and part of being unique and individual inherently means it's not going to actually work for every single person. And that's not to say you have to go the opposite end. It doesn't have to be ultra hipster. It doesn't have to be something that's so weird that only one person or two people in the crowd are ever going to, like, get anything out of it. That's the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm not saying shoot for that, because that's kind of pretentious if you're going that far with it. I don't think Terrifier 2 is remotely pretentious. It is the least pretentious thing ever, but it is unapologetically this passion project that is meant for people who will like exactly this type of movie. It's not pulling punches, so that more, you know, conservative horror viewers will be into it. You know, it's like, if you like this, you'll probably love it for what it is, because of what it is, rather than, wishing it was watered down to appeal to more people. And that goes for like anything really. But that is like partly why this feels especially special to me, and it felt like special when I was watching it. Because it's a ripping good time. It's fun. It made me laugh. It has great kills and gore, and like I said, music, and it looks great. Like all these things. But ultimately, it feels like it's not pulling punches for what it is. So if you don't like what it is, that's fine. You'll hate it, and you can move on with your life. But this will always be more exciting to me than most things that are made by, say, Blumhouse, right? And Blumhouse have made some good horror movies. I'm not like shitting on Blumhouse as a whole, because there's great stuff in that in that library. I love Happy Death Day. I love what else have they made? Did they make Insidious? I love Insidious. If they made Insidious, I love Insidious. But I'm sure there's other examples. But they've also made some crap, and they've made whatever. But it's very much this becoming more and more of a mainstream thing. And it's not about being counterculture. It's not about like saying, oh, I don't want to be part of the thing that's popular. It's just that inherently, when something becomes more popular and becomes more homogenized, it inherently starts to feel less individual, right? As an entity. And I'm not saying a single movie does that, but like a company or like a franchise can become that as it goes on. And I think Terrifier 2 is a great example to me of just something that is unapologetically itself. And I love that about it. And I'll always appreciate that with movies. Which is not to say that it's original completely. Like, no, it's a homage to a lot of things. It's clearly got a love for 80s slasher movies, which I love, which is part of why it appeals to me. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. But, so yeah. That's my top 10, everyone. Honorable mentions, stuff that I left off that just missed. I was pleasantly surprised by Bullet Train. I thought that was a really fun time. That kept sort of twisting and turning, and had sort of, as it went on, I discovered that I ended up liking a lot of the characters, which I thought it looked like it was trying too hard in the trailer, and I felt like it was maybe trying too hard when it was when I was in the first 10-20 minutes. But as it went on, I found that, this is actually working quite well, and I was, it was a really fun kind of pulpy, sort of Tarantino-light action movie on a train with a lot of, a really good cast and a lot of different sort of wacky roles. I had a good time with that. Other like horror stuff that was great was Barbarian was really good, as was Deadstream, which was also a very funny horror comedy. Violent Night was a good time. But yeah, that's pretty much it for honorable mentions, I think, for me. I don't know if I want to do. Do I want to do a worst of the year? I don't think so. I don't think I want to do a worst of the year. So I'll just mention a few stinkers. Jurassic World Dominion was trash. Like, it was easily the worst Jurassic Park movie. Like, I had very little, like, it was everything I hate about these legacy franchise sequels, where it's just nothing but references that feel really forced and contrived. The plot was convoluted. Characters were just doing things so we could force in like plot points to be decided, rather than like try to give proper character arcs that made sense. It felt like, I don't know, I hated that movie. I also really didn't like the new Hellraiser, and that one hurt a little bit because I was hoping it was going to be good, but it was just really, really mediocre, which sucks. Obviously Moonfall was bad, but no one's surprised that Moonfall was bad. At least, I mean, Moonfall, I'll give it this. Given everything I just said about something being unapologetically what it is, Roland Emmerich is kind of like, even though it's really dumb and he very much feels like part of the Hollywood blockbuster system, he does kind of have his own like version of dumb that he will do no matter what. And I'll give it credit, it is unapologetically a Roland Emmerich film. I just don't like Roland Emmerich movies, but it is really dumb. As far as anything else, like, yeah, I mean, no one wants to hear me rag on Marvel movies, but Multiverse of Madness was like meh. Like, it was so much pish. I just did not enjoy watching it at all. So there's that. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I saw that get some praise. Like, people did like that movie. I hated it. I wanted to strangle every single character. quite early on, so that wasn't for me. I mean, most other things though were just kind of in middling if I didn't like them, or were fine. But but like, there you go. Anyway, that's my top 10 of 2022. Hopefully, oh, this has been 50 plus minutes. Jeez. Hopefully, this has been an enjoyable trip through my favorite movies of the year. Obviously, there's more to see, more to enjoy. Things that you might be maybe you're thinking some obvious stuff is missing. Top Gun Maverick was good. It was fine, but I didn't love it. It was solid for what it was, but not in my top 10 material. Thank you very much. But that's the only one that I think maybe people would expect me to have. I suppose guilty pleasures. If I was to throw out some guilty pleasures, like I actually kind of liked the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's not a good movie, but I kind of liked it for what it was. Halloween Ends, Halloween Ends would genuinely might have made the top 10 if the last 15 minutes didn't chicken out of its premise and just became like more nostalgia bait trash at the end. Because the last 15-20 minutes is just so cowardly. What the movie was doing before that was actually quite interesting. Not always necessarily great or well executed, but certainly commendable in what they were trying to do. And then the last 20 minutes is just like, nope, lol, here's just the same like crap that we've been trying to do for the last couple of movies. So that was a shame. But there you go. Let me know your favorite movies of 2022 in the comments. And of course, you can like, subscribe, all those things help out a lot. And check out the reviews of some of the movies. A lot of those movies that I mentioned were sci-fi or horror, and they're done in either Screams After Midnight or the Atomic Cinema Experiment. The Batman is neither, but that was done just as a standalone thing with me and David, who's now on the Collector's Cut, working through franchises. So yeah, check out all these things. So thank you very much. You can support all the content and keep it all coming over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. If you are interested in more kind of just me doing top 10s of things, I would be tempted to do it. I've considered going back to years where we didn't have the YouTube channels and doing top 10s for movies for other years from before, just prior years, like years in the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s and stuff like that, or subgenres of things. I mean, some of these do end up getting done in some of the podcast shows with the other person, but people might be interested in, for example, on Twitter today I was talking about some vampire movies and said that something wouldn't make my top 10, and immediately I thought, oh, maybe I should do a top 10 vampire movies on the channel and see if people are interested in that. But let me know. But anyway, that is me. Thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. You keep watching movies. I'll see you guys next time.